everyone, and welcome to the second episode of Influencing Safety with Bill Martin, who currently serves as the president and CEO of Think Tank Project LLC. I'm Kate Wade, the editor of Incident Prevention Magazine, and your host for this podcast. In this episode, Bill and I discuss psychological safety, what it is, why it's so critical to line crew safety, and what you can do to create it in a crew environment. So let's get started. Welcome back to the podcast, Bill.
Thanks, Kate. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, we love having you here. So I want to kick things off this morning by asking if you can define psychological safety for our listeners. What does that term mean?
Well, that's a good question. To line crews and utility workers, a lot of these terms that are flying around now, psychological safety, emotional intelligence, HOP, human organizational performance, high reliability organizations, they sound like just another Kool-Aid. But psychological safety, when we understand what it really is something that we develop on our own, and it existed long before somebody knew what to call it. What's his name? Timothy R. Clark wrote The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. That is a good book to try to understand the matrix of how it works. He breaks it into 4 stages. Stage 1 is it has to be safe to be included. So we've all been there. You're going with a basketball team, you feel like you're the odd one out, or with a group. Until you're included, it's not safe to be included, and you feel that, and it inhibits your ability to contribute. Once it's safe to contribute, then it needs to be safe to learn. That's stage 2. Being safe to learn means that you can make a mistake and fail, and you're not flogged and tarred and feathered for it. You're actually you're helped to encourage to learn how to do it properly. So if it's safe to learn, then stage 3 is becomes safe to contribute. And you can use these stages for your family, your work, your crew. Every kind of organization or group you deal with has a different level of psychological safety. Some places it's barely safe to be included. Some places it's safe to contribute. You can say, hey, I got an idea, and you're not beat up for it. Once it's safe to contribute, the last stage, according to Timothy R. Clark in his book, is it becomes safe to challenge the status quo. So that's kind of the high end. When you have a crew that works in a flow state that looks, or a basketball team that's a winning team that just flows, and they don't need to talk to each other. The ball passes like fluid, and everything happens like a river. That's when it's safe to contribute and safe to challenge the status quo. That's the type of level you end up operating at. And I've been there on crews where we don't even talk to each other. We know each other's moves. We can interpret little nuances in the person next to you to know what you need to do next. So that's kind of the way I like David's. Timothy R. Clark's book, The 4 Stages. I'm going to mention also David. I mentioned his name twice already by accident. David McPeak. I'm just reading his new book, and I'm going to tell you, he embodies what it means to have a questioning attitude. He asks questions all through the book, so it feels like you're in a discussion with David in the textbook. So in the books he's writing, it's really this is his second book, Frontline Incident Prevention: The Hurdle: Innovative and Practical Insights on the Art of Safety. But he talks about influence over authority, and this is a quote from his book. It says, "Leaders should seek and rely on their influence more than their authority. The problem with safety is we typically start with authority, which limits our influence," which is, this is all about influencing safety, and psychological safety is a strong piece in that. If we don't have that, according to Amy Edmondson, we're in a knowledge economy. It's it's a competitive knowledge economy, and we don't want to leave any knowledge on the table. But when it's not safe to speak up, we leave a lot of stuff behind on the table that never comes up. And in a knowledge economy, that makes you less competitive. So starting with influence instead of authority, according to David, is another good way to go. I might be able to explain it in a story too. Can I tell you a story?
Sure.
So this was one of the, I've been flying for 22 years, so I have a whole bunch of these stories. But this was up north of me here. We landed at a hospital because the patient was transported to an ER. And I've told this story before, and if I've repeated myself, I'm sorry. But so a family of 4 is riding their bikes on a bike trail. There's 2 children, a husband and a wife. And there's a change in the pavement. The wife's tire hits it and she falls over and she fractures her skull in 2 places. And um, when I get to the hospital, she's intubated and unconscious. It's a bad bleed in her head. Husband's got tears running down his face, holding his helmet, and he's wearing his bike shorts. And I ask, was she wearing a helmet? And he says, no. And instantly, when we hear that, we go to that cause and effect thing that happens in our quick brains that, well, if she's wearing a helmet, this wouldn't have happened. Well, that could be true. But then I asked, why wasn't she wearing a helmet? And he says, she refuses to wear one. I said, were the kids wearing the helmet? Yes. And you were wearing a helmet? Yes. So now I know that accident didn't just happen. That dynamic that occurred long before that accident that allows her to wear her helmet, not wear her helmet, is what caused the accident. So if I want to fix that, I need to find out what happened that she wouldn't wear her helmet, and why wasn't it safe for her husband to say, hey, we're not riding if you don't wear your helmet, right? It wasn't, for some reason, it wasn't safe to have that conversation. It is now, but it's too late. So that's kind of where psychological safety, does that help? Because that's where it plays into this whole story of influencing safety. The cues and clues are there early, but if it's not safe to discuss it, it doesn't enter into the formula for your day. So,
well, so let's talk about crew relationships and crew safety. One of the questions that you always ask people is whether or not crew relationships affect crew safety. And most people agree that the former absolutely affects the latter. So can you explain why it's beneficial to build trust and psychological safety within a crew? And also, like, what's likely to happen if that trust and feeling of safety aren't present in a crew?
all right. Well, when you said most, I've had 100% of the utility workers and construction workers that I have asked that question to instantly, without any cognitive load or thought, say, absolutely, crew relationship affects crew safety. And then if I'm speaking to a management group, they say the same thing. Absolutely, crew relationship affects crew safety. And I'm thinking, wow, what a benefit that is in a society right now that's totally divisive and argumentative, and sometimes we even pit union and management against each other. Everybody agrees. So we really need, that's low-hanging fruit for us. If everybody agrees that crew relationship affects crew safety, then that's where some education could come in to help inform and improve that situation when you see it's failing. So so why is it beneficial to build trust? So if you want to be able to speak up and be able to contribute, then you have to have trust. And trust isn't like an easy word to throw around, but Paul Zak, in his article, The Neuroscience of Trust, actually defined what it is, which was kind of interesting in neuroscience. Trust is oxytocin. It's a hormone. And what's interesting about that hormone is we can't release it in ourselves, but we can release it in others. And the things that inhibit the release of oxytocin are fear, frustration, anxiety, and anger. So if you're in a crew relationship, family relationship, business relationship, where it's authoritarian and there's some frustration, anger, anxiety, there's a low level of trust because you can't release oxytocin. And he actually they did a study, that experimental group and a control group. And in the experimental group, they actually injected oxytocin up people's nose, and they got them to donate more money. So I'm thinking sprinklers systems, I don't know, but that's a whole nother story. It's probably illegal. So if you have if you're coming upon your crew and you see they're engaged in a heated discussion, that's actually more of an anger or causing some anxiety in some people that can't deal with it, you can now spout all the things they need to do to them. Hey, you guys, get snap up and get together. But that's not going to work unless you can establish trust first. So when we know that psychological safety has 4 stages, we know that it requires trust to engage, and trust is oxytocin. When we show up and there's a low level of trust, we now know it's really kind of, it's a no-brainer, no pun intended, but that's where we start. We have to release oxytocin in these guys and pull them into us, get them connected. And it's really interesting. Once you start to synchronize and connect, ideas fly. They come when you're in a comfortable environment where you can contribute and you hear something from somebody, it triggers something in you immediately. So the different angles that you come from, when you're trying to lead, really, I think the angles make themselves when we create an environment of psychological safety and trust. Like right now we're talking, when you say something, it'll trigger something in my mind. If I'm giving a job brief and nobody's talking, nobody contributes, nobody's predictions change. Nothing comes out of them of any, some things may come out, but if they ask a question, all of a sudden it changes the dynamic, but it has to be safe to ask the question.
Well, so one of the things that I think you sort of referenced, and it's something that you taught me about, is this idea of interpersonal brain synchronization, also known as IBS. So can you explain what that is and like how it affects or improves crew safety?
Sure. Well, IBS is irritable bowel syndrome, but that's not what we're
Yes, I'm
talking about.
aware.
So this is interrelational brain synchronization. So it's defined as harmonious rhythmic coordination of actions between individuals. So the harmony that occurs in a basketball team, in a tight-knit group, in a ballet, that's high end. But you can also see it in a movie theater, right? So you can see it when your brain starts to lead the movie because it's a scary movie and everybody knows something's about to happen. So you're gripping your seat, everybody's getting tense. And if you put everybody's brain in an fMRI scanner, the same part of their brain would light up, and we're linked. Everybody's linked to that movie. We're synchronized because we're going to scream at the same moment, right? It's over. If there's psychological safety and trust and we start to interact together, then we synchronize. And when we synchronize, we start actually thinking ahead of the person next to us sometimes, where you actually finish their sentences. I'm sure you've done that with your husband, right?
Yes.
Or they call you up and in one tone, what's wrong? You can tell on the phone what's wrong because you're synchronized with them. And the more synchronized we can get as a crew, you've watched them. I've worked on crews where we were in a flow state. And even when we finished the project, like, whoa, it's like exhilaration. That was incredible, And but to get there, it's a journey. You can't have all that baggage. You can't be ruminating about somebody who just screamed at you to go tell you. We think the louder we speak, the more heard our point will be, and it has the opposite effect on performance. So I like to talk about this, like, so your parents, parents that have children, some of us are better at than others, but we bring home a meatloaf, right? I mean, a baby is a meatloaf for 3 months. It can't do anything, not like a deer that can go running up the road right after it's born. So you have to do everything for it. And then I'll ask groups, I'll say, so, do you keep chemicals like under your kitchen sink? And a majority of people still do that. Under the kitchen sink, you got drain cleaner and liquid plumber, or whatever, all that's toxic stuff. So then I say, so did anybody drink it? And so far, I haven't found anybody. I'm sure I'll find somebody who has, or maybe, I don't know, but they laugh. And I say, so let me explain the reason for that. Reason you didn't drink it is because your parents, not only were they parents, they were safety experts. And every Tuesday in the toolbox talk at the kitchen table before breakfast, they went over the MSDS chemicals sheets for all the chemicals in the house, so you would know what chemicals were safe and unsafe and what to do about it if you were poisoned. And then, of course, they had a lockout tagout procedure under the sink, and everybody laughs because it's not true. But the reason is because they're synchronized with you, and every decision they make, you are in their mind, and because you're connected. So it's called neural synchronization or interpersonal brain synchronization. And it only happens when we are connected. And that only happens if it's safe to be connected. So,
Well,
yeah.
So I want to talk more about this like tactical kind of stuff, because it's interesting to talk about the theory and the books and all this kind of stuff, but how do you actually go about creating psychological safety in a crew environment? And I'm especially interested in how you do this with contractors who work for multiple companies. Can you give us a couple of examples of how a crew leader or the team can build psychological safety among themselves?
Sure. So it's, Kate, I'm really glad you're talking about this, because this is stuff, you can read about psychological safety. I mean, we're the information age. Anybody can Google this, but how you apply things, the how is really important. We can have the greatest information in the world, but if I can't bring it to a crew level to be able for them to resonate with it and apply a tactic, it's just a lot of really good information, and there's tons of noise in the information. So you get sometimes I don't want listeners to be turned off because we're talking about psychological safety. It is applicable, and my heart goes out to contractors, especially. I mean, at least in a utility, you have this similar crew most of the time in a similar environment, but contractors are moving from utility to utility and contractor to contractor, and they also have pressure because they have to perform to have their come in within the bid, so the company they're working for can survive and make money. A utility operates on the spinning electric meter, which seems to be less pressure. And the other thing with the contractors that is hard is, so you and I are a contractor, and we're skilled at what we do, and now we're going to work for this company. I have to sit down and have the safety talk from that company, and basically I have to drink that Kool-Aid. And then my contractor also has his own Kool-Aid, and then I can go to work. And in my mind, the work is the same no matter who I'm working for. But every time I sit down for a different company, I got to drink their Kool-Aid in order to survive in their environment. So I think what we're talking about is come up with tactics that make safety portable, right? So as a contractor, I have a belief. And when you have a belief, then your actions have to be moving pictures of those beliefs, or you're in conflict with yourself. You can still drink the Kool-Aid no matter where you go and not be in conflict with your contractor, but it's worse to be in conflict with yourself. So, for example, if I'm a contractor, right? What we need to do, something we can think about is the current dynamic. Dave McPeak also talks about this in his book, but there's kind of an authoritarian hierarchy in the industry still, that came from military fire departments, where it's leader follower. But right now, a lot of places, I know in Texas, they're experiencing a lot of turnover, a lot of new young linemen. So the years of experience are leaving. So really what we need to do is we need to understand that the cumulative genius, right, of everybody getting together raises the level of how we're going to respond to whatever these problems are and our solutions. When we go leader follower, we're just nodding our head. But when we go to a cumulative genius, we come up with a better solution. So we have to learn how to flip that dynamic. And so one of the things that are simple tactics is consider flipping that dynamic. So get nervous when everybody's nodding their head, right? So everybody's going, yeah, like you're nodding your head right now, right?
Yeah.
So right. But so we get nervous. That feels really good, right? That's another neuroscience effect. We love as a species, we love it when people agree with us. We love confirmation. Confirmation bias is one of the strongest biases, where even Google, when we look at something, it makes us feel good because it keeps sending us the things we like, right? And there's even people that are graduating from college now, and their whole job is to see how many likes they can get for their company, right? So which is, I can't even understand that. But I lost my train of thought for a minute.
Oh, we're talking about tactics, about
okay, all right,
creating
right.
tactics for
So
psychological
flipping,
safety.
sorry about that. I get, that's how I am.
I get it. I totally get it.
So flipping the dynamic means when you start seeing cues like everybody nodding their head, that should make you nervous, because that doesn't mean we're right. It just means we all agreed on something. And like I said, as a species, we love it because it affects the pleasure center in your brain, which is the same place as chocolate and sex, right? So now we're not only agreeing, we've connected and we're anchored into that agreement. And then when the other lineman comes into the group and says, hey, dude, I don't think this is really going to cut it, that doesn't feel nearly as good.
Right.
to the group, to the whole group, we're like, whoa, no, dude, hey, you just don't understand. Listen, we got this. It's okay. But if we want, a tactic is to be interested in why a person, likely as intelligent or more intelligent than us, all of a sudden has a different idea. We don't have to like him. We don't have to like the idea. But that's one tactic, is to start become interested in the person with the other idea. We don't have to like it. It's a simple tactic. Flipping the dynamic of how we operate affects different parts of your brain that makes you more inquisitive, more curious. And a questioning behavior is what we're looking for to raise, to pull out of everybody. Because once that person starts talking and we start listening, we might see something we didn't even consider, or it'll reinforce what we're doing because the guy is so far off.
Right.
Right? It could
Yeah.
happen. Could happen either way. Another simple one was from Atul Gawande, the Checklist Manifesto. I might have mentioned this in the last podcast. I'm not sure. He wrote the Checklist Manifesto. He's a surgeon at Johns Hopkins. They have this, in the medical industry, there's 250,000 deaths a year from medical errors. That's not, I mentioned that, I think, in the last podcast. So some occur in the operating room. And when these people get together to operate, the nurses, the doctors, the aides, the person with the appliances, that's the tech guy, if you're replacing a knee, for example. He did a study, Atul Gawande did a study where they had everybody identify their name, their role, and any concerns they have before the operation. They had to use their name because they'd pull a bunch of people together, didn't even know each other. Now on a crew, that's not necessary, you know each other. But if we just confirmed after the job brief that, just like we would in three-way communication for switching or a jumper, all right, what's your role? And all right, and Kate, you might say, well, I'm in the bucket today, and I'm replacing a set of double arms, and I'm going to work with John, who's in the other bucket. Okay, John, what are you doing? Yeah, same thing. He just said the same thing. And he said, yeah, I got a little concerned. I think the DA bolts we got for this are too short for the size of the pull. I mean, those are the kind of things that come up.
Mm-hmm.
But more than that, when you get to the apprentice who's afraid to speak up, you are practicing speaking up, right?
Yeah.
If we want to get good at anything, we practice. It's been part of our if you have kids on a football team, they get good because they practice. You want to learn violin, you practice violin. We tell everybody, yeah, we want you to speak up. You can speak up. It's safe to speak up, Kate. Well, what are we doing to practice that? This Atul Gawande calls this the activation phenomenon. If we stand in a group and identify our role and any concerns we have, we are 80% more likely to speak up during the event. That's what they found in the study. Low-hanging fruit, Kate. Just to, somebody reading off a job brief that we do every day becomes a ritual.
Mm-hmm.
But the conversation is where the genius comes out. That's where once you start identifying your role and any concerns you have, you can see the genius in the experience of the worker come out into a engaged, interconnected discussion with everybody. The two guys in the bucket don't walk off and talk by themselves, and the groundman doesn't go talk to some of the flagmen. Everybody's there. And I think that's, without going into a whole lot of other detail, I think that's key. I also am a fan of simulating. I mean, the Navy SEALs do this, right? They simulate. They don't practice until they get it right. They practice till they can't get it wrong. Mm-hmm. If we practice speaking up, we'll get it. And I promote the 3 Ps, right? Practice, primes, proficiency. So that's, if we just think 3 Ps, if there's something we want to get better at, we have to practice. We want to practice getting good at flipping the dynamic, and we have to practice looking for that cue that everybody's nodding their head and laugh. Say, everybody's nodding your head. What's wrong? Right? I mean, one of the Army majors from World War II, general, can't think of who it was right now, said, when everybody's thinking alike, somebody's not thinking.
That is a good one.
Right.
Well, and I'm also thinking that, the more comfortable people are in their work, the more that they're going to speak up if they feel safe. And so it might not just be about whatever's wrong, but it might be just different ideas that they have. But by creating safety in a group, that you can actually advance. And I think you and I had talked about, was it 3M or one of the companies where they gave people, their employees, time to, work on their own ideas. And and try to come up with, just new and different things. And I think you said that's where maybe sticky notes came from.
And duct tape. Yeah.
And duct tape.
Yeah. They had a half a day or something to innovate.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens when it becomes safe, the cognitive load of your brain loosens up and has room to actually innovate, create, and invent. I just did a post on LinkedIn. We were up on Whiteface Mountain several years ago. The pole burned in half on one of the Black Diamonds, along one of the Black Diamond trails. And so that's a problem in the middle of the winter if they want to keep their ski lifts going, right? So we designed a double cross arm splice fix to put the phases up at the top of the double cross arms, which means we had to climb the cross arms. And then we also had to get 400 pounds worth of material down to the pole, down the Black Diamond. It's not in a manual anywhere. Mm-hmm. But we just sat down. When everybody sat down, it was just so invigorating to listen to the ideas pound off each other to create solutions, and then and pick up red flags. Oh, that's not going to work because this has to happen. And how are we going to make it safe? We really should isolate the line at either above and below, so we don't have to think about grounding it and remove that from the table, because it's just an isolated piece of wire. And but that innovation and invention to what I know, there's linemen and electric utility workers listening to me now that have experienced that. And what happens when management comes in and creates an unsafe and psychologically safe environment because it's authoritarian, or they yell, or this is what we're going to do, they squash enormous amount of knowledge economy.
And I think make people nervous. I mean, obviously I don't have a background. I've never been a lineman or anything like that, but I tend to perform more poorly if I'm really stressed out, or I feel like somebody is like breathing down my neck, yelling at me, micromanaging. It works a lot better when we're all collaborative, and I know that I can say something stupid, maybe do something stupid, and be like, whoa, and have the safety to do that and then come back from it. But
absolutely, the studies are all proven. When you are feeling uncomfortable, you are not going to operate at your highest level of performance.
Yep, 100%. Well, so one of the other things I wanted to ask you about, and we've sort of hedged around it, but one of the things we talk about a lot in this industry is stop work authority. And so I'm wondering, how does psychological safety, or the lack thereof, affect stop work authority?
So that's we almost have probably already answered it, but it's good to be clear. You hear a lot of companies, they'll come right out, everybody has stop work authority, and because we say it, we think it's true. And that's another cue. If you're looking for simple tactics, when you hear somebody say something, what we want to know is, we want to verify that it's true. Mm-hmm. Right? So trust but verify is huge in our industry, right? You don't say, hey, yeah, line's dead, go ahead. Right? We test dead and then work, right? Oh yeah, he said it was dead, must be okay. Trust and verify is a tactic we use all the time, but we don't use it in all the right places. And when somebody says, yeah, everybody has stop work authority, you need to verify that. Does that mean that everybody in the crew, do you feel comfortable speaking up? And they're going to say yes. So let's try that. Well, what do you mean? Well, we're doing a job today. I want you to stop it at some point. And you're the apprentice, right? I just want you to stop it. Say, hey, look, I'm uncomfortable with this. Can we stop for a minute? And just see what happens. And if nobody listens to you, then that's where we have to work, because in order to stop work authority, somebody has to listen. I know a case where an apprentice was in a bucket working next to a journeyman lineman, and they were transferring, and they transferred the 3-phase. They're transferring the middle phase, which is right over the neutral. And as he's slacking off, as he's to get ready to transfer to move the phase up, he's got to move it up quite a ways. So he's got the jacks at an angle. It's letting off, and the phase is getting lower and lower towards the neutral. So the apprentice is saying, hey, that you're getting kind of close to the neutral. And the journeyman looks at, okay, kind of ignores him, keeps going. He says, hey, you're getting close to the neutral. Okay. Then he hollers down to the foreman, hey, he's getting kind of close to the neutral. And the foreman says, all right. And then he swings the bucket, and the journeyman says, where are you going? I said, I don't want to be here for the flash. And then next instant was, because the phase got to the neutral. So he spoke up several times, but unless we practice what that looks like, our response may not be what we expect it is, because we are, it's called, we might get into heuristics in the future here. We have to talk about that, but the consistency heuristic, we are really good at driving a bad plan all the way to failure, because we're driven, okay, yep. On Everest, I went to Everest base camp, was supposed to go to camp 2. But when we were there were some people that died. There was a turnaround point. They've been hiking all day. They're going up. They're at 26,000 feet. They can see where they want to get to. And their turnaround time comes and they ignore it and just keep going. They know they shouldn't, but they keep going because they've gone all this way. And we got all this way. You just have to go that much further. It's kind of the same as the lineman. He's not that he was ignoring. He's engaged in his work. And we just continue consistently to drive a bad plan all the way to failure. And those people that went up Everest died because they could get there, but they couldn't get back. So,
wow. Well, so I think we've talked about a lot today. I hope our listeners have a lot to chew on. I just want to ask if there's anything else you want to mention before we close out this episode.
I think if anybody's listening, it takes action to make these changes. Psychological safety is just a word, right? I mean, I think I've told this story, and you probably know, like I hitchhiked to Colorado and back in the 70s. And I learned there, before the term even existed, that what I say and how I say it affects other people's response. And then sometimes I had to be careful because it wasn't safe for me to respond the way that I thought I could respond. So I had to be careful. So that's psychological safety. Don't let the word scare you. We all live with it, right? We live with how we are capable of making people angry, making people happy. But what we want to do in a working environment, we want to help people become the best version of themselves, to operate at the highest level that they can. And if we do things that put that in a different direction, it affects all of us. It just doesn't affect that person. So in an economy where the infrastructure is falling apart and we're going to hire more people to put it back together with less experience, we need to rely on everybody's ideas, even if we don't like them or their idea. So cumulative genius reigns. And I think there's all kinds of really good theory out there. I know there's an article in your toolbox talk about Sbar this month. And that's a really good tactic. It's a little military. I think Nate Boutwell was the lead on it, and there were a couple of PhDs that co-authored with for him. I can't remember their names, but they use that. They were using that in hospitals. The situation, the background, and assessment and recommendation, and in conversations that might help make it psychologically safe if we have a system and everybody knows the system. Look, this is what we're going to do. We're going to discuss the situation, the background. Then we're going to assess what we're doing, and then we're going to recommend. So we're not trying to beat anybody up. This is the system we use. But everybody has to agree on that, and it has to be safe to even apply the system, right? Yes. So in hospitals, they went to the STEP program, and they used a simple acronym called CUSP, C-U-S. And everybody agreed that would be a tactic. If you're working on a crew, for example, if you adopted this into a line crew, so you're on a line crew, and if you hear the C word, look, I'm a little concerned about this. That should trigger the whole crew. Okay, he's concerned. That's the first of the 3 letters of CUS. All right, so we go, well, let's talk about it. Okay, yeah, and if they blow me off, and now I'm going to look further. Look, I'm not sure I understand. I'm not sure my concern was really considered. I'm not sure I understand how we're going to move forward from here. That's the U. And that should be a trigger for everybody. Okay, we're 2 out of 3 letters, because the 3rd letter is S. That's stop. Let's stop and reevaluate, because I'm concerned and I still don't understand. That's another simple tactic. There's a lot of, often we're in our cave hammering away at a square piece of stone trying to make it a wheel. And in the cave next door, there's 4 wheels on a Corvette, right? We just have to look next door and say, oh, cool, you got 4 wheels there. We could just do that, right? Well, CUS is just something they use one tactic they use. Now, SBAR is another good tactic. It's a little more complicated than CUS, and I'm a lineman by heart, in my heart, and for 20 years. Keep it simple, stupid rings really clearly with me. I the more complicated it is, the less I can apply it to my day. So I think honestly, if linemen start to think about flipping the dynamic and just look for the cues, they'll come up with their own tactics, right? I've used one. I just had somebody, I have a paramedic friend of mine who just said they're using one that I was talking to some linemen about, and they overheard me. And that was the red flag words, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you hear, I think, maybe, should be, might be, probably, those words mean we don't know. So if it's of any consequence what you're about to do, you just take another couple seconds to think it through. You still might do it, but you might do it with a fail-safe strategy instead of just winging it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that, I don't know. I don't know if I answered your last question there. That's kind of what worries me about these podcasts, is the words themselves and the complexity of safety, and the noise that surrounds us. I think if we boil it down to simple tactics that resonate with the worker, because who's the person that is affected the most, right? It's the guy doing the work.
Mm-hmm.
And to Dave McPeak's book, he said, when somebody gets electrocuted, who gets hurt worst, the genius lineman or the apprentice, right? It's everybody. Once that injury has occurred, we are all exactly the same.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that I hope this is really close to my heart, this one, Kate. My core belief is something that I have tried to model my life after. And if we aren't sure what we believe, I think that's a good place to start. And we might even want to talk about that at some point. I believe that when we're helping others become the best version of themselves, we're being the best version of ourselves. That's a simple core belief. And now I need to model my life so my actions are moving pictures of that beliefs. And when I'm making it harder for somebody to do something, I'm in conflict with myself. And I tell people that, well, how do you decide what you believe? And I say, well, my suggestion is go for a hike, nice quiet hike in the woods, go sit on a rock and decide. Can you be good at this work and be safe? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And we already know every utility worker I have talked to and construction worker believes this: crew relationship affects crew safety. So they already know what they believe. All we got to do now is model tactics that match that belief. So sorry, I hope I didn't drag this out too long.
Of course not. I just want to thank you so much for your time today, Bill, and all of your insights. In our next episode of the Influencing Safety podcast, Bill and I are going to dive into the nitty-gritty of emotional intelligence. Until then, stay safe and be well. The views, information, and opinions expressed during this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Utility Business Media and its employees. It is strongly recommended that you discuss any actions or policy changes with your company management prior to implementation.